South Africa. It's a nation that has been forged in conflict, really defined by struggle, and then ultimately reborn in hope. So today, we're going to trace the epic story of how this country came to be, from the very dawn of humanity all the way to the birth of its modern democracy. You know, to really get South Africa, you have to rewind the clock. And I mean way, way back. We're not starting the story with colonial ships in the 1600s. Nope. We are going back millions of years, because this land isn't just a part of human history. It is, in many ways, where human history began, in a place we now call the cradle of humankind. So for thousands and thousands of years, this land was home to people like the nomadic San hunter-gatherers and the Khoikhon, who were pastoralists herding livestock. But then, around 2,000 years ago, something big started to happen. Bantu-speaking farmers began arriving from the north, and they brought with them iron tools and new ways of farming that would completely change the landscape forever. And look, this just blows up any idea that this was some simple, isolated place before Europeans showed up. Not at all. Sophisticated kingdoms like Mapungubwe right here were thriving. I mean, this was the heart of a huge kingdom, a hub of international trade that connected southern Africa with places as far away as India and China. This land was already a global player. And that global connection we just talked about, well, it was about to take a very, very dramatic turn. We've now reached the first huge turning point in South Africa's modern history, the permanent arrival of European settlers, an event that would, you guessed it, reshape this land forever. You know, it all started pretty small in 1652, just a supply stop for Dutch ships, a place to get fresh food and water. But the settlement grew, and as it did, Dutch farmers, who came to be known as Boers, pushed further and further inland, claiming land. And to fuel all this expansion, the colony began importing thousands of slaves. Then, in 1806, everything shifted. The Napoleonic Wars were raging in Europe, and Britain seized control of the Cape, pulling it into its massive global empire. All right, so the next chapter is explosive. I mean that literally and figuratively. Because buried right under the soil was a treasure that would grab the world's attention and end up drenching the land in conflict. Welcome to the mineral revolution. I mean, really think about that question. What happens? Because this discovery wasn't just about getting rich. It was a fundamental rewriting of the region's entire destiny. It lit the fuse for new conflicts and created an industrial powerhouse whose shockwaves we can still feel today. So first up, 1867, diamonds are discovered near the Orange River. And this discovery triggers an absolutely massive diamond rush. We're talking tens of thousands of prospectors just flooding into the area. And Britain, seeing how valuable this was, moved fast to annex the whole area in 1871. And then, in 1886, came the big one, gold. A massive gold reef was discovered in a place called the Witwatersrand. Now, this wasn't just a find. This was the largest gold deposit the world had ever seen. And just like that, the independent Boer Republic of the Transvaal became a global economic giant overnight. The stakes were now unimaginably high. So this just set the stage for a monumental clash. You've got these two forces on a collision course. On one side, you have the British Empire, driven by this relentless ambition to control all this incredible new wealth. And on the other, you have the fiercely independent Boer republics, who just happened to be sitting on the world's greatest treasure. A collision was pretty much inevitable. And the result was the Second Anglo-Boer War, a horribly brutal conflict that lasted from 1899 to 1902. The British, trying to counter the Boers' guerrilla tactics, used a scorched earth policy and set up concentration camps. Tens of thousands of Boer women and children and an untold number of black South Africans died in absolutely horrific conditions. This war left some very, very deep and lasting scars. So after the war, Britain's goal was simple: unify the territory and secure its own interests. A new nation was going to be forged from the ashes of all that conflict. But the huge question remained: who was this new nation actually for? And the answer they came up with would lay a foundation of racial exclusion. So in 1910, the four colonies, you had the Cape, Natal, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State, they were all brought together. And boom, the Union of South Africa is formed. Now, on the surface, this looked like a reconciliation, right, between the British and the Boers, creating a single, powerful, white-ruled nation inside the British Empire. But, and this is a massive but, here's the fatal flaw. The peace between the two white groups was bought at the direct expense of the black majority. The Constitution basically cemented white political power into place, and it set the country on a disastrous course for the rest of the 20th century. And they didn't waste any time. This exclusion was systematic, and it was immediate. Just 3 years after the Union was formed, they passed the 1913 Natives Land Act. And just look at these numbers. It legally reserved the vast, vast majority of the country's land for whites only, kicking millions of black South Africans off their ancestral land and making sure there was a huge dependent labor pool for the mines and farms. But this system of segregation, it was about to get so much worse, so much more sinister. It was about to be codified, perfected, and turned into this rigid, all-encompassing legal framework of oppression. This was the era of apartheid. So after World War II, there was this wave of nationalism among Afrikaners, who were the descendants of those early Dutch settlers. And this wave swept the National Party into power. And they came in with a promise to implement a new ideology, one that would, in their minds, ensure white supremacy forever. The word they used for it was apartheid. It's an Afrikaans word, and it literally just means apartness. And that was the whole point. To separate every single aspect of life based on a completely made-up racial hierarchy. And it was all ruthlessly enforced by law. The Population Registration Act put every single person into a racial box. The Group Areas Act meant entire communities were literally bulldozed to enforce segregation. And with the strict pass laws, black citizens were basically turned into foreigners in the land of their own birth. It was total systemic oppression. But you know what? Systems of total oppression, they always inspire total resistance. And that's the final chapter of our story today. The long, the painful, and ultimately the triumphant struggle for freedom that captured the attention of the entire world. After decades of internal resistance, armed struggle, and massive international pressure, the apartheid state finally started to crumble. In 1990, an unbelievable moment, Nelson Mandela walked free. And what followed were 4 years of incredibly tense negotiations, with the country constantly on the brink of civil war. And then, on April 27, 1994, the impossible happened. You saw these long, winding lines of people of all races queuing up to vote together for the very first time. And in a way, it's wild. It brings us completely full circle. The story that started in the cradle of humankind with the very origins of our species arrived at this incredible moment where the country had to decide together how to define its own humanity for the future. South Africa's history is just a profound lesson in conflict, in injustice, and in the remarkable power of reconciliation. The journey from Mapungubwe to those voting queues in 1994 is absolutely staggering. And it leaves us with this critical question that really every nation has to face. After centuries of division, what does it truly take to build a united future from all the broken pieces of the past?